Welcome back, everyone. So in the previous section, we talked about a basic formula to write a good prompt. It's pretty straightforward. Initialize the context, provide the actual task, any input data, and finally any constraints and formatting rules. That's a general recipe. Now what I want to do is show you some specific techniques. And I'm breaking this down into two sections. The really, truly useful prompting techniques, and then the sometimes useful prompting techniques that I personally don't find as valuable or are more niche. So I've seen other courses, they'll just have like 50 videos in one massive section about prompt engineering. Most of it is like, here's just one really specific, bizarre thing you can do in a prompt that's not that useful. What I'm trying to do here is call your attention to the stuff that matters, and then also just give you some of the more niche things if you're interested, but I don't want to waste your time. So this section, just to be clear, is the actually useful techniques. And the first of these techniques is something called one-shot or few-shot prompting. These terms of n-shot prompting are actually originated from different ways of training models, and then they've kind of been co-opted in the world of prompting. And it has to do with how many examples we provide to the model in our prompt. So here's an example of a zero-shot prompt. This means that there are no examples. We're not showing the model at any point what we want. We're just telling it and assuming it will figure it out. So classify the sentiment in the following tweet, and then a tweet. Sentiment analysis is a somewhat common thing to do where we take a piece of text, a tweet, a Reddit post, a blog post, whatever, and we try and figure out what is the sentiment of this content. Is it a positive thing? Is it a negative? Is it neutral? And there's different schools of thought for how you actually do that. Do you assign a numeric value? Is it just positive or negative? Is it just positive, negative, neutral? But anyway, I'm asking the model to classify the sentiment in this tweet. And this can work just fine. So this is an example of something called zero-shot prompting. There's no examples that we're providing. Compare that to this example here, with this other prompt that's very similar. It says you are a sentiment analysis assistant, given a tweet, respond with the overall sentiment of the tweet. But then there's a clear example. Here's a possible input, and here's the corresponding output. So Arsenal completely gave up on winning the league this year. Output is negative. So we give it an example, and then we prompt it, right? We say input, at least I'm looking forward to next season. Come on, Arsenal. And then output, we let it fill in that blank. And the concept here, the goal is that it can learn, it can understand, oh, I just want to give you the word negative as the output. That's just one example here. If I didn't do this, the format, the type of analysis it does might be different. So let me just show that. I'm just going to make up a tweet, analyze the sentiment in the following tweet. And my tweet will be something very, very negative. I really hate you. Okay, clearly it should tell us that that's negative, and it does. The sentiment in the tweet, I really hate you, is negative. The word hate, it gives me a whole explanation. But maybe I don't want the whole explanation. Maybe I just want a single word, negative, positive, or neutral. It's much easier to, automate and put it in a database, and it's just friendlier to work with instead of this whole paragraph. This is kind of a trivial, contrived example, but it is an example nonetheless. So I could instead say, analyze the following tweet, I really hate you. But before that, I can give it some examples and say, here's an input. We are so happy to be here. I don't know who would tweet that. And then I can say the corresponding output is the word positive. And then I can say, here's your input. What is the corresponding output? So let's try this. Now I just get the word negative, right? So it learned, or it didn't really teach it anything, but it figured out the format that I want based on my example. This is what we would call a one-shot prompt. Shot just means how many examples you provide. So the first attempt was zero shot. This is one shot where I'm giving it an example, but just one. And if I had two, it would be two shot or any more, three shot, or some people would use the word few shot. But the concept is that shots refers to examples in the prompt, and this can be useful. And we saw here, this maybe it's useful, but we could have probably gotten away with just saying only respond with the word positive, neutral, or negative. That would be just as easy instead of providing an example. But let me show you something that is also contrived, but would be harder to explain. I'm going to come up with some weird format where I want it to translate AAA into the phrase or the word BBB. So it's going to shift every letter. For example, if I had, CSS, it should translate that where it shifts the letter C forward to a D. Whoops. It should become D, and then the S's become T's. So it's just moving every letter, one letter forward in the alphabet. And I could try and describe that. I could say, take this word and move each letter forward one letter in the alphabet. It might be a little hard to explain. And this is just a silly, trivial example. Or what I could do is say, translate the following. And of course, if I just wrote like ABC, it's not going to know how to translate it. But if I give it an example, let's say ABC, and I'll use the arrow syntax. This is just one way of showing this, the before and the after, the input and the output. ABC should become BCD. And we'll do one more example. How about X, I don't know. How about the word LOL? What comes after L? HIJKL, M. And then after O is LMNOP, right? So LOL becomes MPM. And I'm just showing it. Here's two examples. And then I can have it translate, CAT. And I'll put the arrow there and have it translate. So this would be an example of a few shot prompt where I'm giving it two examples. Let's see if it gets it right. DBU, that seems right to me, right? C becomes D, it moves forward. A moves forward to B, and T moves forward to U. Again, contrived. But I didn't have to explain what I wanted. I didn't have to try and put it into words. I just showed it an example. So this can be powerful. When you have some format that you want and it's having trouble picking up on it, you can show it. Just here's an input and here's the corresponding output theoretically you would have given me. Or you can use the actual words input and output. You can kind of structure it however you want. But having these examples can make a big difference. I don't start with them. I always start with no examples. And then if I run into trouble, then I can try adding an example. If it's not doing what I want, I'll add another example. The more examples, the more verbose your prompt is, but generally the better results you can get. The next tool or technique or strategy, whatever you want to call it, has to do with showing an output example. So it's kind of tied to what we just saw, end-shot, one-shot, few-shot prompting. But end-shot prompting is about showing an input and a corresponding output. Sometimes I just want to give it a template for the output format. If I want some specific output format, there's ways I can do this without having to show the relationship between an input and an output. So I think it's easiest if I just show this. Let's ask it to generate me a song, a playlist of songs. Generate me a playlist, let's zoom in a bit, of 10 songs to play while I sail around the world. I'd love to sail around the world one day. That's the plan. Not there yet. So if I just hit enter, it's going to come up with some format. And it's likely going to have, Sail, and that's the song, and then the artist. Ocean Eyes by Billie Eilish. It better have Southern Cross in here. That's a quintessential circumnavigation song. Anyway, it has the song title, and then the word by, and then the band or the artist. If I want a different format, for some reason, the search tool I'm using or Spotify or whatever has a particular format I'm going to stop this generating. What I could do is show it that format. So I'll edit my prompt, and I can simply say, use this format for each song. And then I can write the format. There's a couple of options for how I do this. A lot of people like to do this where they use angle brackets to signify replace this with a song title. So maybe I want something like this, hello, and then the year. I don't know when Adele's Hello song came out. I have no idea. And then I can have the artist. Let's suppose this is the format I want. The song title, then in parentheses, the year, then a dash, or maybe we'll even get fancier. For some reason, I want an arrow. And then I want the artist name. So I can show it exactly that format. Here's the song title, and then I'll put parentheses. And in those parens, I'll write song year, or even just release year or year. it's pretty smart. It can figure out what I mean by this. And then I'll do an arrow, and then I'll have artist. So unlike the previous video, I'm not showing it an input and a corresponding output. I'm just giving it basically a template. Use this basic format. And let's see what happens. There we are. Come sail away, and then in parentheses the year, and then a random arrow, and then the artist name. And oh, there we go. Southern Cross, 1982 in parentheses, an arrow, and then Crosby, Stills, and Nash. So that's a simple example. I can do this in many different formats. You can often get away by just doing this as well. It can figure out what you want. I could probably just do title and then year in parentheses, an arrow, and then artist, and it will still give me the same format. Yep, still works just fine. But a lot of people like to use those angle brackets just to make it clear, maybe also to other users, that it's a variable or it's supposed to be replaced. So let's look at one more example of providing a template for the output. I'm going to ask it to generate me some sample data, maybe some 5 fake users. And I want each user to have like a name and an email and maybe a birth date and different pieces of data. Maybe I want to use this for an application I'm building, some testing purposes. So I could start by saying, generate me 5 sample users. Maybe I'll just start with that. Generate me 5 sample users. Let's see what it gives us. So age, occupation, interests, location, and it's giving it to me in a numbered list. So I'm going to stop it, and I have more specific things that I want. So of course I could say generate me 5 sample users. Each user should have an age, an occupation, interest, and location. But I can also just show an example according to this format. And then I can have a basic format where I'll say, first name, colon, last name, colon, email, and what else? Maybe birth date. Just showing it that basic format that I want is enough. And it will generate me 5 users according to that format. It gives me a disclaimer saying these aren't real people. But there we go. First name, last name, email, and birth date. But maybe I actually want this to work with code. So if you're not a developer at all, it doesn't matter. But I could ask it to generate me a code-friendly format. So I'll tell it to generate me 5 sample users as JSON. Again, not a big deal if you don't know JSON. And I'll say each user should follow this format. And then what I can do is just write a little bit of JSON. Basically, I wrap this in curly braces, and I'll indent this just to make it look like JSON. And you'll see that it gives me a slightly different result now. Perfect. So now it's giving me a JSON array of individual user pieces of information, user objects. I could take this and use it in some programming language like JavaScript or Python. So it doesn't matter if you don't know code, but simply providing this template here without showing a true example, right? I'm not saying here's an input, here's an output. It still is very effective just to show it the general format that I want my output in. And that can be some super specific, really niche output, or it could be something that's pretty obvious and you can just put it in there to guarantee that you get that format. Because sometimes you'll run the same prompt, like I've asked it for a playlist a couple of times without providing a format, and it will change the order. Sometimes it does the song and then the year, then the artist. Sometimes it doesn't include the year at all. But if I give it the exact format, I can get some repeatable output. One strategy that's quite simple but also very effective is to ask the model to ask us, the querier, any follow-up questions. So whatever the actual task is, generate me a business plan, or give me feedback on my resume, or write a cover letter, or write me a tweet, or write me code, whatever it is, we can then tell it, here's your task. Before you actually do it, ask me any follow-up questions, and as many as you want, to gather more information, to fill out any holes in the knowledge or any issues in the prompt, and generate the best possible result. This is a nice thing you can add on to pretty much any prompt. Not everyone needs it. I tend to only do this for the more complicated prompts that I'm writing. If I'm trying to get it to draft me text specifically, like for a marketing copy or for a script for a video, things that are a bit more detailed, I'll ask it to ask me questions. But if I'm just trying to get like a translation of something or a quick summary of an article, it's probably not worth going through that process, but it can be useful. So let's try a quick example of this. This is generally more useful on a more complicated prompt where there's a whole bunch of extra information you might not consider. Why not let the model figure that information out and just get it from you? So I'm going to ask it to write me a script for a YouTube video. I have a YouTube channel that is moderately successful, not really successful. It does okay, but it's a huge effort to make a video for me compared to making courses. I just suck at making YouTube videos. I'll start with some context about myself. I'm a coding YouTube video creator. You are an expert at writing scripts for YouTube videos. Draft me a script for let's say a 5-minute YouTube video that teaches people, I do, coding education on my YouTube channel. So let's say teaches people about the differences between Python and JavaScript. Okay. And I could just start with that, but I'm going to add in the before answering me, ask as many follow-up questions as needed to gather information and generate the best possible result. And it's going to come up with a whole bunch of important questions, just things I probably wouldn't have considered. So let's see. It's asking me, do I have a target audience? Do I want to focus on technical differences, practical key use cases, or both? Is there a format that I prefer? Any specific areas in the languages you want to emphasize? So the way that I can respond here is by just using the numbers. So I'll say, do you have a target audience in mind? My audience is mostly intermediate programmers. Most of them know more JS than Python. And then I can answer the second question. Would you prefer to focus more on technical differences? I'll say both, technical differences and practical use cases. Is there a format that I prefer? Let's do a direct comparison. Any specific areas? Let's say focus on the libraries, community, and use cases. 5, do you have a specific style? My style is informal with a little humor. I don't take myself too seriously. 6, is there any prerequisite knowledge you want the viewers to have? I'll say viewers should know a little bit of programming. Again, this is all kind of rushed. You could provide way more thorough answers. Do you want to include, it's blocking, what does it say? I can't read it. I think I'm too far zoomed in. Do you want to include any interactive elements like quizzes or exercises? Let's see what it does. No, I did not mean to hit enter. I accidentally hit enter too soon. Let's tell it. Let's include a quiz or 2. All right. So save and submit. I have to stop generating here. Save and submit. Let's see how that goes. It should give us a pretty decent script. We gave it a lot of details. But I wouldn't have thought, I could have if I sat down and really tried to come up with all the different information to provide it. In the perfect world, I would just know to tell it this stuff. But it helps when it just asks me the questions. It makes it pretty easy. So here's a script. We're not going to go over the whole thing. And it maybe leaned a little too hard into the humor, if you want to call it humor. We're serving a spicy dish, a showdown between 2 titans, Python and JavaScript. And no, it's not a jungle fight. It's a battle of languages. It's a little over the top for me. So I could easily just say, please rewrite it with less humor. I'll just say that. And there we go. Now, I can't attest to how great this video would be. I'd have to read it, and you keep sort of iterating back and forth and conversing with the model. But for these more complex prompts, I find it can be pretty useful to tell the model, ask me any questions that you have. The next tip or strategy or whatever we want to call these videos that I'll show you is around working with tables. So ChatGPT can accept tables as an input and also generate tables as an output. So I'll show some examples of this. Let's start with generating tables. I'm going to ask GPT-4 to generate me, just to start, generate me a list of, I don't know, 6 colors. Let's say 6 pretty colors that go together nicely. Give me their name, the RGB color code, the HSL color code, and the hexadecimal color code. If you don't know all these formats, it's okay. It's just, I'm trying to get some tabular data. So their name, RGB color code, HSL color code, and hexadecimal code. So let's see what it generates me to start. Here are 6 colors. Okay, so it gives me basically a nested list, right? So coral, here's the RGB version, here's the HSL version, here's the hexadecimal version. And I guess we can let it keep going. I want it to instead give me a table. It's kind of going slowly here, so maybe I should stop it. All right, I'll just stop it, and I'll say, generate me a table. And that's all I need to say, and it should be able to generate me a table. And here we are. It takes a bit, but it's working on it. It's making me a nice table. Okay, it finished up, and here's my table. Now, if we look closely at this, if I actually copy this content, and I'll just paste it in here so you can take a look, this is what it actually generates. This type of table here, this is what's known as a markdown table. So markdown is a special syntax that we can use to generate HTML content very easily. And we'll talk a little bit more about markdown actually in the next video. One of the features of markdown is that we can create tables using this syntax. So we can export, if you want to call it export, we can copy a table out of ChatGPT as this markdown format and use it anywhere else that markdown is supported. But we can also write our own tables and provide them in this format, and ChatGPT will understand them. And if you struggle to create a table like this, there are tools out there, lots of free tools online that help you generate markdown tables. So I'll make a 4-column table, and I'll have some headings. It just says A, B, C, and D, and then some text in here just as an example. If I click generate, it generates the markdown table for me that I can then copy and use. But I can also actually just use ChatGPT to format a table for me correctly. So if I do have some data that I want to pass in as a table, I can basically just make up my own format and say something like, let's go with item, so product, and then price. And I'll just have a product name like Apple, and then price will be 2.5, and pear will be 2, and I don't know, grapes. This is a silly example, but grapes will be 3.25. Okay, so it should be able to figure out that this is supposed to be a table. I can tell it, given the following table, what is the most expensive item? And let's see how that works. Should be able to figure it out. The most expensive item is grapes with a price of $3.25. And then I can even say something like, can you format the data as a real markdown table? And now it makes me the true markdown table. Remember, it just renders it to look nice. That's kind of the point of markdown. It's a very quick way to generate HTML. But underneath this, when I copy it, it's just a markdown table using this kind of funky syntax where you use pipe characters and dashes, and it turns it into a nice looking table. Anyway, there's a lot you can do with tables. This video maybe isn't particularly persuasive as far as why you would use a table, but it shows that we can use tables, both as an input and as an output. In addition to working with markdown tables, ChatGPT can work with any feature in the markdown syntax. So again, if you're not really comfortable or at all familiar with markdown, it's this nice syntax that we can use to generate structured documents very quickly. So for example, to make headings, we use the hash symbol to make a H1 level heading. We use 2 hash symbols to make a slightly smaller heading. We use 3 to make an H3. We can make bold text using double asterisks, italics using a single asterisk. You might, if nothing else, you might know Markdown from creating comments on Reddit. We can make block quotes, ordered lists, bulleted lists. We can have code blocks, horizontal rules, which are lines. You can put images in, you can put in links. There's tables, which we've already seen. There's a bunch of stuff that we can do. So the reason that I bring this up is that we can have ChatGPT generate Markdown for us and also interpret Markdown and get it as an input. So here's just an online Markdown editor. You can see things like if I use a single hash symbol, this makes me a heading. This is the rendered result over here. And then I can have some paragraphs of text. I can have a code block. Whoops. Let's do like print. Hello. Let's see if I can zoom in here. You can see it makes me a code block over here. Anyway, we can use this in the world of ChatGPT. So I could ask the model, I could say, please generate me a roughly 500 word, and let's keep it even smaller, 300 word blog post on how to use, and let's tell it, you are an expert teacher and programmer with a knack for writing great blog posts. Okay, please generate me a roughly 300 word blog post on how to use the React use state hook. Again, if you don't know React or JavaScript, don't worry. I'm just coming up with some technical content. This has nothing to do with Markdown at the moment. I'm going to tell it your output should be in Markdown format. And then I can even get more specific. Please use headings and subheadings and also correctly format code blocks. And I'll also tell it to bold any key phrases or terms. Okay, let's see how that goes. So you can already tell it's giving me Markdown because we've got a heading here. I've got paragraphs. There's a bold term. I've got subheadings. It's giving me structure. Oh, and look at these nice code fragments. Now, the way it's rendered, the exact colors, the fonts, that is specific to whatever website, in this case, the ChatGPT website. But the underlying content, once this finishes generating that we can look at, the underlying content is just Markdown syntax. And it's generating that for me. It makes it a lot easier to create blog posts because a lot of blogs just support Markdown right out of the box. Okay, so here's our nice blog post. Key terms are bolded, right? We got syntax, highlighting, all this stuff. If I copy the underlying Markdown, I'll take it over here. This is a Markdown editor. You can see that it actually generated the text correctly, right? Not just the actual words, but it puts the Markdown syntax in there. It's making me code blocks using the special syntax. It's creating bulleted lists. It's using headings. And it's just a really nice, quick way to get structure in your content. So that's how we can use Markdown. You can also provide Markdown as an input, of course. You can tell it, here's some Markdown. I want you to, tweak the content, but keep it as Markdown or do something else with it. And of course, it also supports tables as we previously learned. While we're on the topic of output formatting and input formatting for that matter, I want to show a couple of other examples. So ChatGPT can work with pretty much any formatting you can think of, any standard format, including things like CSV. So if I ask it to generate me a data set of, 10 countries with their names, populations. It's going to complain that it only has populations as of the training cutoff in 2021, which is okay. And then we'll say GDP maybe. Let's just go there. Let's see what it starts with. Yeah, the knowledge cutoff of 2021. Okay, so it gives me this nested list structure again. So instead, I could say, give me a Markdown table, as we've already seen. Or I could say, output a CSV, or output the data in a CSV format. Comma separated values. This works well if you want to plug it into something like a spreadsheet, Excel. Or if you want to plug it into pandas in Python or any sort of programming language, CSV is often a very easy way to do that. So that's one example. I can also give it data in CSV format. Of course, I'll tell it, here's a CSV formatted data set, do X with it. Another thing that I can do is tell it to generate JSON. We've seen this once or twice. JSON is JavaScript object notation. So I'll just use the same prompt. I'll just follow up and say, can you now generate the same data set in JSON format. And this is going to be the same information, but presented in JavaScript object notation, which is a bunch of key value pairs, country, China, population in millions, 1,434 million population. So it's the same information, just different formats. That's all I want to show you. So you can work with tables, you can work with CSV, you can work with JSON, and pretty much any other format that you can come up with, including your own custom format. Right, we've seen you can provide an example template and say, this is what I want you to output the data as. Use this crazy format where you use arrows or you use smiley faces to separate each character. You can totally do that. It's not that useful. You typically want to use pre-established or predefined formats, but it's pretty flexible. This next tip is also a pretty straightforward one that might seem obvious, but the concept is that it's generally better to write multiple single-purpose prompts in a sequential order instead of a single multiple goal prompt. So instead of one prompt that says, write me a title for a blog post, an outline for a blog post, an abstract for the blog post, a meta description, and then write the blog post all at once, which ChatGPT could do. It can take these complex prompts and handle everything at once. Instead of doing that, it generally works better and gives you better results if you split the tasks up into smaller pieces. So first, write me an outline. Second, write me a title for this blog post. Third, use this outline and this title, write the actual blog post. And this is especially useful when you're dealing with code-related tasks, writing applications, or it's not great at writing full applications, but writing features and multiple files, it's not great when you try and get it to do everything at once. The models just don't perform very well compared to providing a sequential list of tasks one at a time. So let's take this example. You are a blog post generating assistant. I am a ski instructor with a blog where I share tips to help people improve their skiing. Help me generate a blog post about common mistakes that skiers make. And then there's multiple steps. Follow these instructions. Generate an outline for the blog post. Then generate a 2-sentence abstract, or maybe we'll just skip that. Generate a title and subtitle for the blog post. Generate the actual blog post text. Those are the 3 tasks. It will probably do just fine if I hit enter right now and I have it do all of this at once. But it leads to better results if instead I break it up, and I'll just start with having it generate an outline for the blog post. And this way, I can also tweak the blog post or the outline myself. If I'm unhappy with it, I can give it feedback, and I'm not, wasting a bunch of time where it's writing a full blog post every time. I can figure out the outline. Am I happy with this? Introduction, understanding skiing basics. Common mistake 1, leaning back. Mistake 2, over tightening boots. Mistake 3, neglecting the pole plant. Mistake 4, incorrect weight distribution. Mistake 5, and then conclusion and a call to action. So it's looking pretty good, but I can still tweak it. Because I split things up into this incremental prompt, I can intervene and say, let's remove the lack of fitness preparation. Maybe some of my readers won't be happy to hear me say that, you're out of shape. So I'm going to skip that one. Let's remove the common mistake number 5, lack of fitness preparation. Okay. And then it regenerates this, and I'll fast forward once this finishes, but it should now exclude that section. I made some changes to the outline. Okay, it's about to finish up, and it skipped common mistake 5. That's gone. All right, so now I can move on to the next step, and I'll generate the blog post first, and then the title, I think. So I'll say something like, using the above outline, generate the full blog post. Use markdown formatting and bold any keywords and phrases. And I'll let this go. It gave me a title, but after it finishes writing the entire blog post, we'll then add our final piece to the prompt, or the final part of the incremental prompt, which is generate a title based on this post. And again, we could have done this all in one go, just one massive prompt. Make me an outline, make me a title, make me a blog post, and anything else. Generally, it performs better if you break it up. And it gives us, the user, an opportunity to step in, to intervene, to fix things, and give feedback along the way. Okay, so let's say I'm happy with that, although it didn't quite finish. There we go. It's about to finish now. And are we good? Let's say I'm happy with it, but of course I could read it and say I want it to adjust the tone. I want it to change, the formatting or whatever I want. I can intervene here, but I'll add the last piece. Let's come up with a better, maybe more catchy title and subtitle for the above post. Slope savvy, dodging the top 4 skiing pitfalls for stellar performance. That's not bad. I could also say generate me 5 catchier titles and subtitles. And that's pretty much all there is to this concept of incremental prompting. It's honestly very simple. It's just taking a big prompt that has a bunch of steps and splitting that into smaller sub-prompts that you run one at a time instead of all at once. The next technique we'll look at is self-criticism. There's not really an established name for this, but that's basically what we're asking the model to do. We're going to ask it to criticize its own output. So if I ask it to write me a blog post on the ski runs with the silliest names in the country, it will generate the blog post. And then afterwards, I can say, can you improve the blog post? Tell me how. What suggestions do you have? And it's criticizing its own output that it generated. So here's a blog post I had it generate me on technical interviews, how to prepare for coding interviews. Here it is. It gives me an abstract and then the blog post itself. So after it finishes, I'm now going to say, can you improve upon the blog post you just wrote? How? And let's just try that. And it will come up with some other suggestions. It can be enhanced by providing more details and examples. It can make it more practical and actionable. We can also add relevant resources and tips for each section. So here's the improved version. It's going to take a while to finish because it's kind of a long post that it's writing. So it made a bunch of changes. It now provides, I'm still getting the reasoning, by the way. I asked it to explain its reasoning every time it changes. It's providing specific resources, highlights the importance of iterative learning. There's a new section on post-interview reflection right here, and it provides more practical advice. And I could also even follow up by saying, what changes did you suggest? What changes did you implement if I wasn't sure exactly what it did? But it's all about additional resources. So it included online resources in every section. We can actually see this if we take a look at one of these sections. It's mentioning LeetCode and HackerRank or Pramp and interviewing.io. It actually includes specific resources. Anyway, that's just a technique that you can use to enhance the output that you get. One thing that I would say I'm not thrilled about is that I said, can you improve upon the blog post that you just wrote? How? I probably should have rephrased this so that it didn't actually rewrite the entire blog post, because maybe I don't want it to rewrite it. I want to see what its plan is. So maybe I could do something like, can you suggest a plan for improving the blog post? Don't actually change the post yet. Just tell me the specific changes and suggestions you would make to improve it. And this might give me a better quality result where it doesn't actually try rewriting the post just yet. It will give me some specific details, and then I can decide, do I want to add personal anecdotes? Do I want to add visuals? And then I can ask it to do those things. Anyway, that's asking it to be critical of its own output.